Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast, where we celebrate individuals and families, businesses, and organizations that seek out and promote the exploration, stewardship, conservation, access, and enjoyment of the outdoors. Gulf Shores and Orange Beach Tourism is the sponsor of our episode today. Warm temps and fresh seafood make the Alabama Gulf Coast the perfect beach destination for your family vacation, couples getaway, outdoor adventure, meetings, conferences, and conventions. Our guest today is Scott Bannon. Scott is the director of the Marine Resources Division for the Alabama Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. Scott, it is a pleasure to have you on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Fantastic. And I have to share with you right up front, even though I have this northernish kind of voice, I actually lived in Alabama for a year in the early 90s. I was in Montgomery, Alabama, and I was on a project for the state's Medicaid agency. And I
consider you an Alabamian then, if you've been here for any extended period of time. I'm originally from Kentucky, but I've been here over 30 years. So I'm an Alabamian at heart now.
All right. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first got to Alabama and I walked into the office where I was working and the account manager came up to me, she didn't say, "Hi, Howard. We're so happy that you're here." She said, or asked this question, "Who is your allegiance to?"
Oh, so whether you're an Alabama or an Auburn fan. So
Yeah.
if you're not from here, it's not bred into you and it's not quite as ingrained. And so my default answer is I support all the teams of Alabama. So it's kind of my political cop out because I love all sports. I love promoting any of the universities and institutions of Alabama. So at the end of the day, I have a few more Alabama Roll Tide socks and shirts than I do some of the other schools, but
Okay.
I cheer for all of them in Alabama.
That's fantastic. Yeah. My response was whoever you want me to support. So that was
Yeah,
it.
who else to cheer for? That usually works well.
There you go. Well, I am very excited that you took some time out of your day to join us on the Outdoor Adventure Series podcast. The work we're doing with Gulf Shores and Orange Beach Tourism is just a great lead-in to a conference that I'm going to be attending down in Gulf Shores later on this September. And as a podcaster and very interested in the outdoor space, the role that departments of conservation and natural resource play in just stewarding the state's outdoor resources and the conservation. But what I love, given that we'll be in Gulf Shores soon and down on the Orange Beach, et cetera, is Alabama has a pretty significant, though maybe not a huge, but a very significant marine component to it. And I would love if you could first share a little bit about your background so we can learn a little more about you. And like you said, you came from Kentucky, but you've been down here for a while, but share a little bit about your background with our audience. And then let's talk about your work at the Marine Resources Division.
Sure. So I am the rare individual that I'm in my dream job. Growing up as a kid in Kentucky, we grew up on lakes and rivers, and I loved being outdoors. I remember the Kentucky State Water Patrol. They don't exist anymore, but the officer at the boat show letting me play in the boat. I went to conservation camp as a kid. The Kentucky Fish and Wildlife Department had a conservation camp. And so when I graduated high school, I said, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to do something different. So I joined the Coast Guard and I had never seen saltwater, made that decision. So I joined the Coast Guard. I spent about 5.5 years on active duty, spent time in the Caribbean, up in New England, a great background for where I am today. I ended up in Alabama and met a young lady from Mississippi, and we decided that we'd make Alabama our home. And so I applied for the Department of Conservation and I got a job and became a conservation enforcement officer. And I tell everybody, I said, again, it's a dream job. I get to go out in the outdoors almost every day. I got to go interact with the public who was out enjoying the outdoors. And of course, we get to enforce the law, and that's sometimes good and bad. I like to catch the people who are deliberately trying to abuse what we have here. And then sometimes it's really about educating folks. And that's the best part of the job is to educate folks. So I worked my way up through the ranks as an enforcement officer. And ultimately, I became the division director, which is kind of a unique position. So I was on the enforcement side, but we have about 40 biologists and we have about 19 enforcement officers. And so I kind of sit at the top of that triangle. And I have a chief of enforcement and a chief science officer that work for me. And so together, we manage and regulate all the saltwater species in Alabama, which is shrimp, crabs, oysters, all the finfish offshore, which is kind of a unique aspect that we help with all the Gulf states to regulate federal fisheries. So it's a very dynamic job. And it's sometimes under recognized here in Alabama because we do have such a small coastline. You mentioned that it's about 56 miles straight across, but we have Mobile Bay and the Delta, the Mobile River Delta system is considered America's Amazon. So
Mm.
the diversity of species in Alabama is actually, it's one of the most diverse ecosystems in the country here in 2 counties in Alabama. So we're very, very proud of that. And I take it very, very serious that the role that we play not only impacts the citizens of South Alabama, but the entire region and actually the entire United States. As you said, you were from somewhere else. You came and visited Alabama. We get visitors from all over the United States and all over the world. And so I want to make sure that we have the best opportunities available for them to come and enjoy the great outdoors in Alabama.
That's fantastic. And what I love about this opportunity to chat with you, Scott, is when I lived in Alabama, and I would admit too, I never did get down to the Gulf. I passed through Mobile
Sure.
and I knew about the beaches, the white beaches, and just how wonderful they were. But it never dawned on me to truly appreciate the water, the salt water, and then all the species that you have just talked about, the oysters, the fish, and other of our creatures. When you are working with locals and doing your work, and in addition to the enforcement, but doing the science of the work, what's the breadth of those activities? I mean, that are required for you to keep this 50-mile long straight line healthy, and also the delta, the Mobile Bay and the delta in that area. What goes into this full-time job of keeping this area healthy?
So it's an elephant that we eat one bite at a time.
Okay.
When you look at the area, so we're ultimately responsible for about 1,200 square miles of land and water. And fishing in Alabama between salt and freshwater is about $1 billion a year. So it's a very lucrative business. But in addition to that is we provide food for the citizens of this country. So the shrimp, the crabs, the oysters that are harvested here, that goes to feed the people. And that's a very important thing for us. And it's a domestic product. It's a safe product. And so we want to make sure that that's always available so that the public has access to fresh seafood, but also locally, those are jobs. That's important to what we do here in Alabama is that we help support the people that live here with these jobs and that their children and their grandchildren. And that's my goal. Everything I do is not geared towards the person. My goal is that I gear everything towards at least that I've looked that far down the road to make sure that the decisions that we make here as an agency are going to be good ones for as far off as their grandchildren. And sometimes that means the here and now decisions are very difficult and those are tough. But I tell everyone I have a great staff. I have an amazing staff. The work that they do, the research that our scientists do here, down to our field level folks who they literally go catch fish and shrimp and oysters and do water monitoring and dockside surveys where they talk to people at the ramp and they measure their fish and talk about the socioeconomic impacts. And so all of these things come together to individual staff members who compile data that makes its way up the chain to me to where they say, hey, here's some decisions that we think need to be made to ensure that we continue to keep this resource. And then there are so many factors outside of our control that impact what we do. Water quality. And I tell everybody that doesn't necessarily mean pollution. Water quality is everything that impacts that water. and we're at the downstream end of a major river system. So things that happen all across the central part of the country, they work their way down here. So we have to deal with that. And oftentimes that's outside of our control. So we learn to mitigate those impacts. We prepare for those impacts, and then we try and educate folks and make positive change. So every day, I mentioned to you earlier, it's an adventure for me. I don't have a job. If I had a job, I'd quit. So I get to come to work and I get to deal with the challenges that we're faced with, but I get to face it with an amazing staff who have a passion that I do. And I tell everyone, I said, again, I'm in my dream job, being able to do what I do. And I have a passion for what we do. And the only insult that I've ever taken personal is if someone says, I don't care. I'm a government employee. I don't make enough money not to care. There are lots of things I could do, but that are different. That if money was my motivating factor, it's about giving back to the public and ensuring that we have a resource here. And I care about the resource. I care about the people around the resource and the impacts that it has. So I think at the end of the day, everybody should want my job.
I love when I hear someone say how much they love what they do. And they don't say, to a certain extent, I love my job. Because to me, I always say jokingly, it's a job. But when you love what you do and you get up and you enjoy it and you look forward to it, that's what I hope for my guests, obviously, like yourself, but my clients that I coach as a career development coach. You should enjoy what you're doing and look forward to it every day. I am curious, you mentioned the river system. I remember when living in the state, I used to travel through many of the counties because we would work with the local healthcare providers on their claims. I remember, for example, like up in the Muscle Shoals area, the water up there. Are you also responsible for the systems and the lakes and the rivers as they're making their way into the state and down and feed it uh, into the
So we have
Gulf
a
or Mobile?
we have a multitude of agencies that are responsible for things there. So my jurisdiction, so to speak, ends really at Interstate 10, which is what bisects Mobile Bay, right at the northern end of Mobile Bay. But
Okay.
our department, the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, we have a Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division. So that Tennessee River system that starts up there, crosses the Tennessee line, comes into Alabama. So the fisheries and the things that go on there are the responsibility of the Wildlife and Freshwater Fisheries Division. But also we work with the Alabama Department of Public Health, the Alabama Department of Environmental Management, as well as many other federal regulators to ensure that these waterways are healthy and that the fishery that occurs in each of those river systems are sustainable. So it is a group effort. Nobody's alone in this, but the department has the influence over the entire state.